right.
Right.
I will speak up. Our microphone, our PA, our amplifier is not working. So yeah, we got Jersey people in the house, so we know how to talk loud. That's great. So we continue our theme of exploring paradox or playing with paradox. And last week we talked about how paradox is the ability to hold two seemingly opposite things in mind at the same time, which is easier said than done. And if you remember, we talked about that wise sage, Bruce Springsteen, who shared with us that, a lot of his songs and a lot of our musicians put forward an idea that's complex. In other words, I can hold patriotism and criticism at the same time. And neither one offsets the other. They're both valid. We talked about the complexity of characters in the world, like in our movies and our TV shows, that the more complex the characters are, who are in one place kind and loving and caring and demonstrating that, and in other ones deceitful and murderous people. But then they're also parents and children. There's a lot of complexities in life. So I'm going to quote Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, which is a management book. And Jim said in his book, Beyond Entrepreneurship, builders of greatness are comfortable with paradox. They don't oppress themselves with the tyranny of the or, which pushes people to believe that things must either be A or B, but not both. Instead, they liberate themselves with the genius of and, where things can be this and this, and not be exclusive. So as we continue this play with paradox, we get to this week explore some of the polarities in our lives, that pulling to the opposite ends and how it impacts the world. Attachment to one perspective often causes suffering. We must be willing to open ourselves up to alternative perspectives, and then find that third way that encompasses the most positive aspects of all of those seeming polarities. Ernest Holmes was very clear that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Yet so often we get caught up seeing from only one perspective and miss what that means. In 1971, in the Science of Mind magazine, Ernest said, "And let us not forget the importance of keeping our minds in a state of good-natured flexibility. Yes, we must be flexible and tolerant, as well as positive and affirmative. If we are so focused on oneness and the big picture, we may miss opportunities to reach out to offer love and support to one another. Then we're not embracing the totality of humanity. And if we get so caught up in the suffering and challenges of the world that we forget our divinity, then we're missing out the joy of being infinite and eternal." Science of Mind asks that we embrace the polarity of humanity and divinity and find that third way to navigate in our lives. Yay, Kitty! Well, we just had someone join the room. I'll grab my water. All right, where was I? Often we stand on one side of polarity or the other. Our language, our way of moving through the world, the questions that we ask one another, and the ways that we seek meaning in our lives all lend themselves to standing on one side or the other of polarity. Are you a morning person or a night owl? Coffee or tea? Are you Democrat or Republican? Do you like cats or dogs? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Male or female? Where are you on the gender spectrum? My spouse is a saver, but I'm a spender. I'm a big picture person, but my boss focuses on the details. Our entire society can sometimes seem to be like we're picking a side, even when you don't fit one side or the other. Once we've chosen our side, whether it's a preference, a belief system, a way of thinking, or a call to action, we then begin to see only the benefits of our side and only the defects of the other side. We can see this in most every debate or worldview that's going on in our time right now. We can think of our Congress. We can think of Hamas and Israel today who are at war. But really, life is so much more nuanced and magical when we can see through those polarities, even just a little bit. There are even differences in the spectrum of beliefs in our New Thought metaphysical teachings. There are absolutists, or I sometimes refer to them as metaphysical evangelicals, and I'm married to one. We sometimes butt up against each other, especially when I'm trying to work through an issue. I'm trying to figure out how or what to do about something, and she comes from the absolute. It's the old thing where I'm planting a seed into the divine soil and then digging it up to see if it's growing or not. And she brings me back to the absolute. So most of our dynamic conversations come while walking the dog. And last week, we were out in the neighborhood walking the dog, and I just shared this thought that was in my head. I work for an airline, and I have had the privilege of status with this airline. In other words, I get all those great benefits because before I went to work for the airline, I was a big customer of that airline. So I got my A-list preferred status all last year and all this year. And with the airline I work for, there's no seat assignments. So when you check in 24 hours before the flight, you get your boarding priority, right? So you check in 24 hours, you're going to be in the A, B, or C group. A group's great, B group is eh, C group is you're in the middle seat, folks, on a full flight. But that status has this magic, and it automatically checks you in for the flight 24 hours prior. And I've had this privilege of every time I fly for business on a free ticket. You get it? I work for the airline. They give me a free ticket to get from here to here for work, business travel. I still have that old status from the old day that automatically checks me in. At the end of December, it goes away. Oh. So I said to Kim, I'm just saying, you know what? I'm going to have to deal with life without this. And I was just saying, I'm not going to have this status anymore. And she goes, why? And I said, well, because I'm not flying anymore. I'm not buying tickets anymore. That's the only way to get status. And she said, why? What do you mean? Just believe it. And I was like, oh, here she goes with the absolute, right? Just believe it and it will be done. So when we get in this dynamic, my aggravation level goes up. And sometimes I bite my tongue and sometimes I don't. But this time I just tried a couple of times to explain, like, well, I'm not buying tickets anymore, so it's just, and she's like, well, why? You know, like, just believe it, and it's so. And I'm like, and we just kept walking the dog. And I thought, first of all, it's not that important to me, right? It'd be really nice. I love perks and privileges. So I fly to Dallas for work on Wednesday. I go to a meeting, and shortly after that, my boss says, I have some news to share. I'm like, hey, great, I love news. The company has decided for all of you who fly frequently for business on free tickets, you're going to get credit towards your status. And I was like, oh, that's great news. She was right. She believed it. Well, and it was a really interesting example, right? And the reason I bring up that this is a form of paradox is, you know, I have a more nuanced, practical view of our teaching. It doesn't make it better or different from someone who says, if you believe it, it's so, right? I just know that if you believe it is so, it doesn't always work for me. I got to believe it, it's so, and then do something. Now, do I understand in the theoretical that what she's saying is true? Of course, otherwise I wouldn't be here teaching it. And I also know that when we set an intention, when I do a prayer for someone else, the last stage of prayer is release. I let it go. I'm done with it. That prayer is over. And the best thing we can do is not be attached to the outcome, right? Not dig up the prayer again to see if it's coming through yet or not. And it's one of the most trickiest pieces of prayer. So when I said, basically, during that conversation, I'm like, whatever. Like, let's change the subject. And I'm like, yes, I believe it to be true, but I could not have imagined a way for this simple thing to happen, except the company then decided, hey, we care about all of you who go away from your families for work. If you had worked for XYZ company or buying tickets on our airline, you would have status. So anyway, in a week or so, I should have status strapped into my account for another year, where I don't have to get up 24 hours before and fly. And for that, I give thanks. All while walking the dog. And who's walking who, But that's one of those things where let's just say we were talking about a political candidate, right? Let's say my wife and I had different feelings about it, and we both dug our heels in and went to our polar opposite realm, as opposed to, like, I could see the paradox in that. Like, I get that there's a part of my brain that says I have to do something that ain't going to happen because I'm not buying tickets to get that thing that I want. And she's saying, no, you just set your intention to have that thing that you want. They're both true. But I had to let go a little bit of saying, I'm just going to believe, I just had to let go of it, not making myself right or wrong, and to let it go. So when we force ourselves, or are forced, or we choose into only one side of a polarity, we begin to experience the effects of the overuse of that polarity, right? If you're just an evangelical new thoughter and just stay airy-fairy in the clouds and never actually take the guidance to move somewhere, then the outcome may not work. Now, it also can be fairly easy to shift back and forth between the polarities when we don't have a lot to lose. For example, preferring cats over dogs. When we find a dog, if we prefer cats over dogs, when we find a dog that we love, it's easy to shift our perspective and go along that way. However, it becomes more challenging when there's more to lose. When it comes in something we've invested a lot of our time and money or energy, it becomes harder to shift perspective. Additionally, it becomes nearly impossible when we discover that something we identify with no longer works for us. This can be seen in our politics, our views on immigration, abortion, spirituality, religion, culture, all those kind of views. And often, rather than opening to the vulnerability of maybe being wrong, which in this case, for the record, I was, we double down on our side. We dig in deeper. We overly focus on the benefits of our side, even if we're no longer experiencing those benefits, and push away the other side. Ernest says, keep the doorway of your mind open, feeling, thinking, and communing with this life. Know that it fills you with light and power in this thing called you. Keep the doorway to your mind open. So rather than forcing ourselves into a single side of polarity, or swinging back and forth between the two sides as we experience the overuses of the one side, we can find a third way. This requires a vulnerability of looking at what is no longer working and maybe see the benefits of the side from which we have pushed away. It can be challenging to change our beliefs, labels, ideas, or even identify with a middle ground, right? That utilizes the benefits of both sides of the polarity with suffering from the overuses. You know, I think about what it might be like for our Congress persons this week. And I have really strong opinions on that polarity. And I also can imagine that on some level, almost everyone there, if they were to let go a little bit of the entrenched polarity, common sense would say the only way forward is somewhere in the middle, right? Is there some way that we can move towards allowing a little bit of seeing each other's other side and finding a path forward through the middle? Take, for example, the thought of how people label themselves. A lot of times I'm an introvert or an extrovert, right? Even the greatest introverts need some time with people, whether it's out in public or a small group or just one-on-one. And even the most outgoing of extroverts need a little bit of time alone. The period of the pandemic and COVID has shown all of us, even the introverts, that too much alone time results in some effects that would be considered overuse of alone time. Overthinking, loss of social skills, loss of meaningful friendships. And only spending time with people can result in the opposite overuses. Exhaustion, no time for self-care, feeling drained. A third way is a balance of time by ourselves and time with others, navigating and discovering the amount of time that's perfect for each polarity to be fulfilled and receive all the benefits that both extroverts and introverts have to offer: great friendships, support, a rich inner life, self-care, and health. Brene Brown has come up quite a bit this month, and she said in her book, The Atlas of the Heart, in these challenging moments of dissonance, we need to stay curious and resist choosing comfort over courage. It's brave to invite new information to the table, to sit with it and hear it out. It's also very rare these days. There's a nonprofit organization in the US today called Braver Angels. And Kim wrote an article about them recently, or last year. And Braver Angels recognize that Americans on opposite sides of the political spectrum often don't only disagree on issues, they increasingly dislike each other without knowing each other, right? This growing partisan animosity is a crisis of our time, they believe, and it threatens our nation. And Braver Angels was created to address this challenge. Their mission is to bring Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and thus strengthen the democratic republic. One way they do this is simply by bringing people together. People are willing to sit down to practice sharing their beliefs and positions without the goal of changing the minds of anyone else, and to respectfully, carefully, and quietly listen. The organization runs workshops, debates, and other events where red and blue participants attempt to better understand one another's position and thus discover their shared values. Somewhere in the midst of this experiment of being able to speak to each other comes a greater view of possibilities. And that was one of the things we talked about last week, is that living in the paradox, being able to hold these seeming opposites, allow new solutions to come out of it. And as much as I love to dig my heels in sometimes, I also know that beauty happens in the creative soil in the middle. There was an interesting example that I'll share in Brene Brown's book, and it came from the examination of a cult leader in the 1950s who had promised her followers that the world would end on December 21st, 1954. and that they would be picked up by a flying saucer and transported safely at midnight on December 20th. Many of her followers quit their jobs, gave away their houses, and dispersed their savings in anticipation of this end. I would say they were pretty committed. Who needs money in outer space? Others waited in fear or resignation in their homes. Those who studied this predicted that the believers who had not made a strong commitment to the prophecy would quietly lose their faith in the leader when the world didn't actually end, and that those who had given away their possessions and waited with the other believers for the spaceship would double down on their belief in the mystical abilities when the spaceship didn't arrive. He predicted that even if the prophecy did not materialize, the followers who lost the most would demonstrate their increased commitment by doing anything they could to get others to join them. At that time, the hypothesis blew the doors off other theories at the time about motivation and human behavior. If I believe in something and it doesn't happen, I'm going to move on. Instead, the prediction was that they would double down. By 4:45 a.m., when the spaceship was a no-show, their leader shared a new vision of the world. Because of their strong faith, they had been spared. As hypothesized by those who studied this, a man named Festinger, the most invested members responded by calling the media with the great news, and they became even more invested evangelicals for the group. Luckily, the doomsday leader prediction failed, but Festinger's prediction didn't, and he changed the way we start to think about human behavior. You can see this dynamic happening today, right? If this happens, the United States will crumble. So we've got to stay in this cycle of preventing that crumble from happening, without doubling down. So as we continue to play with these paradoxes and polarities that come into our lives, it's important that we hold gently to our beliefs, ideas, and even our identities as we assess what's working and not working in our lives. Like, I held gently to my belief that I'd really like to have that status, but I can't think of no way that that's going to happen, and let it go. While Kim over here is saying, just see. Can we look at the areas in our life where we are holding tightly to one polarity and villainizing the other, and see if there's a third way that utilizes the benefits of both aspects? Third way thinking can be implemented in our lives individually and collectively to find solutions to the big challenges that the world is facing today. And as we move into prayer, and as you maybe do some inner work this week, think of what are some polarities that you are navigating in your personal life. Where do you find yourself doubling down when your views are shaken? What is the third way you might find to work in your life? And where might you find better balance to help navigate this? What are some polarities you're navigating in your life? Where do you find yourself doubling down when your views are shaken? And is there a third way that may work for you in your life? So let's pray. Infinite Spirit, divine source of all that is, I know that there is only one. And oh my God, the rainbow of colors that come out of this one are beautiful and powerful and creative. And at the same time, the outpicturing may be divisive and confrontational and villainous and uncomfortable. And what I know from this speaking of this word of prayer for myself and all present today, that there is indeed a way forward in the knowing that I can hold these two seeming opposites in mind at once and discern a way forward that works for all. I know too that if this calls me to be an activist on one side or another, that when I do so with the ability to at least see, at least see the divinity in each and every person walking this planet and moving boldly in the direction of their beliefs, that when I can see the essence of love and God and beauty that has to be behind it because I believe in oneness, then it has to be present in those who appear to be entrenched at polarities. And so I claim and know in this moment that there is a path of peace through these differences. And in letting go even just a little bit to the sense of right or wrong, and instead holding my belief in the outcome. And that outcome is a greater expression of love in this world, or an airline status. That I know that all of this is indeed possible as I focus on the one. And so I allow in this moment to breathe in the essence of peace. Peace in my heart, peace in the heart of those in this room, and letting it move forward into Israel and Palestine, and to the families who may be experiencing loss and fear and separation. So I pray in this moment that there is a third way forward to allow for peace to once again come to this world, and to outpicture in ways that when we break bread at the table, we can see those common, beautiful beliefs between us. And so I just give thanks. I give thanks for knowing that behind everything there is but the one. I give thanks for knowing that love prevails always. And I simply let this prayer go into the law of life. I really let it go, knowing it is done. And so it is. Amen. Namaste, y'all.